All right, let's jump right into a really cool topic. How in the world do scientists even begin to make sense of the incredible chaos of life on Earth? I mean, think about it. From the tiniest microbe to the biggest blue whale, everything has its place in this giant interconnected system. Seriously, just picture it. You've got cheetahs sprinting across the savannah. You've got thousands and thousands of different birds. Our planet is just absolutely bursting with millions of different living things. The sheer variety is, well, it's mind-boggling. So that brings up the big question, right? How do we make sense of all that? That's really the core idea behind the science of classification, what we call taxonomy. How do we sort all this life into groups that actually mean something, that show us how they're related, and, just make them easier to study? Okay, so here's the game plan for our journey today. We're going to start with the absolute biggest picture, the 3 domains of life. Then we'll zoom in on some of the amazing details in the animal and plant kingdoms. And finally, we'll take a peek at where this whole science is going. So let's kick things off at the very, very top. We're talking about the highest level of classification here, a concept that honestly turned our whole understanding of the tree of life upside down back in the 20th century. What's super interesting is that this whole idea of a domain is pretty new. For the longest time, science used a 5-kingdom system, and it was mostly based on things you could see, what an organism looked like. But then, in the 1970s, this scientist Carl Woese comes along and starts looking at life on a genetic level. And what he found? Well, he realized the old map was just plain wrong. So get this, he's studying what everyone just kind of lumped together as simple bacteria. But when he started analyzing their genetics, he discovered that some of these microbes were radically different. We're talking their cell walls, their membranes, their whole genetic instruction manual. It was all unique. It was a total game changer. His work basically showed that some of these tiny single-celled things were as different from bacteria as you and I are. And this right here, this image, it shows the brand new structure he proposed. Instead of just one big messy group of simple organisms, he saw 3 totally distinct, fundamental branches at the very root of the tree of life: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Okay, this table is a perfect little cheat sheet for this whole new system. You've got bacteria and archaea. Both are what we call prokaryotes. That's just a fancy word for simple cells that don't have a nucleus. The key difference? It's their chemistry. Bacteria have this stuff called peptidoglycan in their cell walls. Archaea don't, and they're the ones famous for living in crazy extreme places, like boiling hot springs. And then there's eukarya. That's the domain for everything with complex cells that do have a nucleus. And yep, that includes us. Every plant, every fungus, you name it. All right, so now that we've got the 30,000-foot view, let's zoom way in. We're going to dive into one of those eukaryotic kingdoms, Kingdom Animalia. Let's take a quick tour through some of the major animal groups, which scientists call phyla. First up, we're starting with some of the simplest animals out there. On one side, you have phylum Porifera. Those are the sponges. They're basically just simple colonies of cells with tons of pores all over. Then you have phylum Cinaria. This includes things like jellyfish and corals. They're a step up in complexity, and their defining feature is those stinging tentacles. Okay, next we've got the flatworms. And yeah, they look simple enough, soft, flat little critters. But here's the really big deal. This was a massive step in evolution, their body plan. For the first time, you see a distinct head and a tail. We call this bilateral symmetry. And why is that so important? Well, having a front end means you can start concentrating your sense organs there, which leads to moving with a purpose. This simple design literally set the stage for almost all other complex animals. Now, check this out. We're talking about arthropods, and they are hands down the most successful animal group on the entire planet. This phylum is just enormous. It has everything from crabs and insects to spiders and scorpions. So what's the one thing that ties this crazy diverse group together? 2 things: jointed legs and a hard outer shell, which we call an exoskeleton. Okay, moving on. Within another big phylum, Chordata, there's a smaller group that we're all pretty familiar with, the vertebrates. And yep, that's us. These are the animals with a backbone. So what exactly makes a vertebrate a vertebrate? This is the key. All chordates at some point in their lives have something called a notochord. Think of it like a flexible support rod. But in us vertebrates, as we develop, that rod gets replaced by a series of bones, the vertebrae, that lock together to form the backbone. That's the defining feature. And within the vertebrates, you've got these 5 major classes. It's a pretty quick rundown. You've got fish, perfectly built for the water. Amphibians, who live that double life in water and on land. Reptiles, with their classic dry, scaly skin. Aves, the birds, defined by their feathers. And finally, mammals. That's us, with hair or fur and the ability to make milk for our young. All right, time to switch gears. Let's leave the animals for a bit and explore the green kingdom. Kingdom Plantae. It's just as diverse and, let's be honest, absolutely essential for all life on this planet. This table really tells the whole evolutionary story of plants. It starts simple with algae and mosses. These guys don't have vascular tissues. You can think of that as internal plumbing to move water and food around. Then you see that plumbing evolve in ferns, which was a huge step. And finally, you get the real game changers, the seed plants. First, the gymnosperms, which have naked seeds, usually in cones like a pine tree. And then the most advanced and common group today, the angiosperms. Those are all the flowering plants. So you might be thinking, okay, this is all figured out, right? The science of classification is done? Well, not even close. In fact, amazing new tools and discoveries are changing the map of life all the time. Take DNA barcoding, for example. This is a huge leap forward. Instead of just looking at what something looks like, scientists can now scan a short, specific piece of its DNA to figure out what it is. It's literally like a supermarket barcode for species. It makes identifying things way faster and more accurate, even if all you have is a tiny piece of a leaf or a single insect leg. Okay, so we've talked about bacteria, animals, plants, but that brings up a really tricky question. Where do viruses fit into all of this? It's a great question, and honestly, scientists still argue about it. The answer kind of gets to the very heart of how we even define what life is. So here's the deal with viruses. They're weird. They're biological puzzles. They have genetic code, sure, but they aren't actually cells. And outside of a living host cell, they're completely inactive, just sitting there. They can't do anything on their own. They're basically biological pirates that have to hijack a living cell's machinery to make copies of themselves. Because of all this, they live in this strange gray area between living and non-living, which is why you won't find them in any of the kingdoms. And believe me, the story is not over. Not by a long shot. There are still millions of species out there we haven't even identified yet. The age of discovery is happening right now. Scientists are constantly finding new species, like a new beetle in Elampathy or a brand new plant in Vagamon. The great library of life is still being filled. And that really is the most exciting part, isn't it? With millions of species still out there waiting to be found, and with incredible new tools like DNA barcoding, you have to wonder, what new branches are we going to add to the tree of life? What will it look like in 10, 20, or 50 years? The book of life is still being written, and we are lucky enough to be here to see the next chapters unfold.